All right, I think we're live. Let me just do a quick sound check on my end. Give me 1 second. Been a while since I got my computer all set up for streaming, so let's see. Can I hear? I think we should be good. And let's do another final sound check. All right, we're good. So I wanted to put together the stream in lieu of the special occasion that is today, which is L. Ron Hubbard's birthday. And I figured what better time to talk about this very big issue that I've been working on behind the scenes for quite a bit than now. I figured, well, while simultaneously there's a celebration of birth and life in some ways, there's also a celebration of death, and I think it's a topic that really has not gotten much traction. And the angle that I'm most interested in covering is more so the law enforcement angle and talking about how law enforcement handled, or rather, I should say, mishandled this entire situation. And for those that want to see the documents and the articles on today's stream, they're going to be linked on the description, so you can go and check those out for yourself and you can read through them for yourself. They're completely free. They are also text searchable, so if you wanted to put them into some sort of chat GPT or Claude tool, you can do that, analyze it to your heart's extent, and so on and so forth. But with that being said, I just want to dive into some notes I made and the records obtained. So, for those of you that don't know, the long and short of it is that Hubbard was found dead at his ranch in San Luis Obispo County. The jurisdiction for that area is the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department. And so the timeline of Hubbard's death is probably the most interesting out of all this, because as this investigative document shows, the death was actually not reported to the sheriff's department by Scientology. And before we get into the weeds, I just want to actually take a moment to first introduce the cast of characters on who we're going to be talking about and who was involved with throughout the entire origin that is Hubbard's death, and ultimately what came to be of his medical analysis by the coroner, or rather I should say the lack thereof. But let's go ahead and just take a quick roll call of the different characters. So first of all, we have the district attorney at the time for San Luis Obispo County, Dan Hilford. Dan Hilford is interesting because the moment his office was contacted by the sheriff's department regarding Hubbard's death, the first words out of his mouth was that he wanted a immediate toxicology and wanted to push for an autopsy. So that's a very interesting note to make on the side of the district attorney, and so that's who the DA at the time presiding is. You have Eugene Denk, that is Hubbard's personal physician, the doctor that provided medical care to Hubbard during his later years. You have Earl Cooley, who is the lawyer for Hubbard and a very well-known lawyer for Scientology overall. He is the guy that represented Hubbard during his last will and the supposed religious exemption that was filed. And then you also have Don Hines. Don Hines is the San Luis Obispo County chief coroner. So he is the guy that has full authority to conduct medical analysis of bodies that come through the sheriff's department. And before we get into some of the more other details, I just want to quickly explain to people how it is that a body even makes its way to the coroner's office. And in fact, it's not a well-known thing that a lot of people understand. A lot of people just simply assume that any type of death is automatically reported to the sheriff's department and that automatically they take over. But in fact, that's not how it goes at all. So there's really how the person dies and whether the death is considered reportable or not. And there's really two broad categories in the U.S., at least anyway, that the law enforcement gets involved in. And one of those is expected medical deaths, where usually no coroner's investigation is required. A lot of the times it might be hospice patients. It might be hospital deaths from known illnesses, elderly patients under medical care, somebody with a documented terminal condition. In those cases, typically the attending physician just simply signs the death certificate, and law enforcement, aka the coroner's office, is not typically involved for a wide variety of reasons. Honestly, probably, as dumb as it might sound, realistically, it has more to do with time and resources. So that's a pretty common one. The one that is not reported to the coroner and the law enforcement does not get involved. The other category, of course, is reportable deaths. So this is things like sudden unexplained death, death outside of a hospital, a violent death like a homicide, overdose, ODing, death in custody, death without a doctor present or suspicious circumstances. Those are situations where the coroner or medical examiner has direct involvement in. So now that you have the whole cast of characters, now that you have the understanding of how the law applies and when the coroner's office gets involved, let's actually dive directly into how Hubbard's death came about. Because from what we can see directly in the investigative report that was obtained through the sheriff's coroner's office through a CPRA, a California Public Records Act request, the death was actually not reported to the coroner. And in fact, the way that the death occurred was that it's crazy to even say this, because I read through this entire thing and I'm like, I really can't believe it's this dumb, frankly, at how clearly, in my opinion, based on all of the evidence before us, and especially because he was such a high profile figure, and especially at the time that it was occurring, which was 1986, the chain of events that took place just were way too coincidental. In the classic literal textbook of example of suspicious deaths that merit a full investigation, and sadly we got the complete opposite. So Saturday, January 25th, early in the morning, Mrs. Irene Rice, a representative from the Rice Funeral Chapter in San Luis Obispo, called the coroner's office, okay? And they called and mentioned that they had received the body of somebody that died, and that the body was suspected to be L. Ron Hubbard. And the people who had presented L. Ron Hubbard's body to this funeral home made it very clear that he had died actually the day before. So over 24 hours had passed. And at that point, that's when Hubbard's body was transported by Hubbard's caretakers and Hubbard's doctor over to this funeral home. And when they were transported there, the handlers of Scientology were pushing very, very hard to immediately dispose of the body, specifically by way of cremation. They wanted no delays. They were very pushy, and it makes it very clear in this investigative report written by the coroner himself. So that's Don Hines. Don Hines repeatedly notes in this report that they wanted this body to be cremated, and they wanted it done as of 4 days ago. All jokes aside, since this guy died about 24 hours ago, and yet just now they're bringing the body over to the funeral home. So very, very suspicious. But Immediately upon the receiving that notice, the coroner went to work to contacting a deputy and making sure that a field deputy was present at the scene, along with Coroner Hines, also to arrive at the scene so that they could conduct a evaluation and do further analysis. At the time, Miss Rice, the funeral attendant, told the coroner that the physician and lawyer of Hubbard were present at the residence, and that even the funeral representative from the funeral home, Mrs. Rice, told Coroner Don Hines that it was really fucking weird that somebody had died on a Friday, nobody did anything, and waited until the very next day, did not contact law enforcement whatsoever, and were pushing very hard to have the body cremated. That is very suspicious in and of itself. I mean, you literally can't make this shit up. It is the classic case of, there's something that is clearly trying to be hidden here. So therefore, you would imagine one would do more due diligence and not allow something like this to be rushed forward. So automatically, right, at the very beginning, we have all sorts of alarms and red flags that should be ringing and should be visible to people. Another thing that's very important to note is that the coroner himself or herself is an appointed position. So the way it works is that the sheriff, when they're elected, appoints the coroner or the chief medical examiner. So it's an appointed position. Usually it's somebody that's been at the office for working in law enforcement for quite some time. So usually somebody that, the way it works, especially with detectives, is it's typically somebody that has dirt on others, is very ready to more or less keep that brotherhood, that sort of, for lack of a better term, criminality inside the department and keep quiet. And the legality is that no matter what the sheriff says, the coroner has full legal power to override any supposed claims, requests, or exemptions and conduct full autopsy of bodies that come before them. And so that is a legal power, legal authority granted to every coroner and a sheriff's department, specifically to remove issues of corruption, where if they come into possession and custody of a body and there's potential suspected foul play, and say, law enforcement is involved and there's possible ties with the sheriff, then the coroner has the jurisdiction and power and resources independently to completely conduct a full autopsy and an investigation to make sure that they get to the bottom of what's going on. And so that's the backdrop that this is all operating on. Don Hines is very clearly notified of all of these various different suspicions. And Don Hines himself actually brings up the point that when the funeral home representative, Mrs. Rice, brings all this up, Mrs. Rice gives the phone over to Dr. Eugene Dank, and Don Hines makes it known to Eugene Dank that he wants a deputy there regardless of what Dr. Dank's medical statement and medical opinion is. He makes it very clear, in fact, in this investigative report, that while he appreciates that information, he still wants a deputy there on the scene to conduct the analysis, and that it's typically of what you would want from somebody to say in this type of position, to say, cool, bro, you do you, but at the same time, I'm still going to do my due diligence and check on the body and see what other information we can get as we conduct an investigation. So on the phone, as Don Hines is speaking to the physician, He asks who's present there, if there's any family members. And oddly enough, again, a very Scientological thing happens, whereas the coroner, Hines, is asking these questions, immediately Dr. Dank says, hold on, talk to the lawyer of Hubbard. And that's when Earl Cooley gets on the phone and is talking at this point to the coroner. And so Cooley tells, at this point, Don Hines that there's no family members present, the wife is in LA, and that if there's that there's a last will and testament. Don Hines asks Cooley when and how that last will and testament was signed by Hubbard. And interestingly enough, that last will and testament was signed within that same time period of Hubbard dying in the last 24 hours. And more interestingly, in this investigative report, the coroner himself brings up the issue that he has to the mental capability and faculties of somebody being in a very ill state, whether it's possible for anybody to even legally know what the hell they're signing off on, know and understand what is going on around them, to be able to even accept such a signature as legitimate or not. Already, right, just at this in this very short phone call that we have, just mere minutes into this conversation, there's red flags aplenty. We have a over 24-hour period that Scientology waited, did nothing with the body, and then just decided one morning on a Saturday to show up at a funeral home and push to get his body cremated. We have the doctor, who is the personal doctor of Hubbard, on call and at the scene, testifying that what he believes to be the case, that Hubbard was otherwise medically fine, and that what the investigative report says a little later on is that Hubbard's own doctor was testifying that Hubbard died of natural causes, particularly a stroke, and that all is well. Hubbard died of a stroke. There was no sort of foul play. Just take my word for it. There's nothing to see here. It is all legally and medically acceptable. That's what happened. And then we have the lawyer right back to back with Hubbard's doctor also admitting to the coroner that they made Hubbard execute a signature on his last will and testament, turning over everything to the different Scientology corporations, and it happening, meaning the signature happening within the last 24 hours. There's all sorts of suspicions here. And at the end of the day, there was no autopsy done. I mean, there's really, and it was ruled ultimately that there was no need. In fact, after this phone call comes in on January 25th, 1986 at 7:30 in the morning, after about a day flies by where the coroner comes and takes a blood sample to run a toxicology at the behest of the district attorney. Okay, the district attorney is contacted by Don Hines, and the DA says immediately, I want a tox and a autopsy done. Only the toxicology is done, a simple toxicology screening, and Don Hines just simply takes the request for a religious exemption so that they don't conduct an autopsy, and says, well, the toxicology did not show up anything of worry, and so therefore we're just going to completely ignore the rest of our due diligence. We're going to completely ignore the fact that this body, this death was reported in highly suspicious circumstances, in a classic textbook case of when somebody's trying to hide something, where in his own words, he's literally admitting that there's very suspicious factors at play with trying to get rid of a body very quickly, pressuring the funeral staff to get rid of the body via cremation, waiting over 24 hours to even do anything with the body, meaning they knew he was dead for over 24 hours and did nothing with his body and kept it at the Creston Ranch. Did not contact any law enforcement whatsoever, and did nothing for the funeral staff to identify for sure and verify that the body that they're bringing forward is in fact L. Ron Hubbard. And also we have the last will and testament executed in that same 24-hour period, with zero qualifications as to and verification as to the mental faculties of Hubbard. Was he of sound mind to be able to even sign that declaration, signing away all of his shit? I mean, and the fact that the day after this analysis was done, or the night that same night when this analysis was done by the coroner, Miscavige shows up and is greasing palms with Don Hines, telling him more or less sweet lies and trying to win over Don Hines to get over any possible suspicions or anxieties that Don Hines might have about the whole ordeal, and that he should just simply take their request for a religious exemption and just roll with it. And literally, that's exactly what happens. Don Hines just says, well, you know, I have technically three biased sources here telling me, all of them from Scientology, telling me that all is okay, despite the fact that you have an entire staff of a funeral home saying, holy shit, this is very weird, this is super sus. You have the words of Don Hines himself saying, this is very weird, this is super sus. You have a DA also saying, this is very weird, this is super sus, I want a full investigation on this. And then Don Hines just completely shits the bed. Don Hines did not have to follow any of those requested exemptions. He had full authority to do a complete autopsy. And the suspicions, of course, is again that the death was not reported in over 24 hours, despite they knew that he was dead, okay? They knew. His attending physician testified and is shown on this report. They knew he was dead for over 24 hours. And supposedly, though, in that same 24-hour period, he supposedly signed, right? He supposedly entered a signature while he was fucking dead, signing away all of his shit to Scientology. How does any of that shit make sense? And then, of course, we have the fact that he's got a shitload of needle injections on, completely unexplained, on his right gluteal area, that even the investigation itself asks Hubbard's doctor, Eugene Denk, to clarify, and he has nothing for him. Even Hubbard's own doctor has nothing for the coroner to explain all the shitload of injections on his right gluteal area. And yet all of this is just taken as, okay, bro, trust me, bro. I mean, it's classic case of cover-up. This is the same shit that my lawsuit against Riverside County Sheriff's Department showed, where you literally have a lieutenant admitting on an affidavit that they fucking lied to me and they lied to the public, and they covered up the files for the death of Stacy Moxon. And in that same period back for the June 2000 of Stacy Moxon's death, less than a month prior, you had also yet another suspicious death of Ashley Shaner, who also died by another Scientologist, and the family of Ashley Shaner sued Scientology and won on that case, and showed that there was a contractor that Scientology had hired, just happened to be running, driving around completely shit-faced, and happened, of all the vehicles and of all the people that this driver ran into and killed, it happened to be a young Scientology woman who was also reportedly trying to leave and had been very adamant about leaving. And the Riverside County Sheriff's Department at that time had initially declined to prosecute and investigate, and not until the family filed a lawsuit and the family won that lawsuit judgment that the Sheriff's Department opened up an investigation and prosecuted that guy with a simple DUI that they ultimately dropped for a fucking fine and did nothing with it. I mean, just so happened to be, right? Just miraculously. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's the story of Hubbard's death. It's a classic case of very suspicious shit. The other thing that's worth noting is that when they were trying to pull up other bodily fluids, so blood, they were able to pull, but they were also trying to pull urine from the body. They could not do so because the bladder had already been evacuated. Another thing to note there. So it's just classic cases, man. I mean, you literally read any sort of forensics 101 textbook, and this is the type of shit that they teach you and train you to look out for. And even in the academy, this is exactly the type of shit that they teach you to look out for. So there you go. I mean, definitely a botched investigation. And I would imagine, frankly, from what I looked at Don Hines' career, honestly, it's pretty clear that Don Hines basically did not execute a full autopsy because they just didn't want any political backlash on their career, and would have ultimately been kicked out and not held their position anymore should in the event that they conducted the autopsy anyway, especially this being such a high profile individual. And even if the county did get sued, again, he legally would have been in the right. He has full discretion, full authority, and all those mitigating circumstances that rule in his favor are pretty fucking evident. I mean, you have a rushed cremation. You have over 24 hours that they knew the body was dead, did nothing. They could have gone to the funeral home the day before, but they didn't. And so all this shit, and the doctor was there, right? And the lawyer was notified also. And a last will and testament was executed and signed just before the night before. So, I mean, it's just, and the religious exemption as well. This is just the type of shit that, classic case of botched investigation. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. So, all right, that's all I got. See you guys next time.